Rachel Loftspring, welcome to the Carrie Croft Show. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I know you have a lot of legal things going on, so thank you for taking the time to talk to me and all the people coming through that are looking to find a surrogate. I found Ellen when I was going through my particular experience, and she became sort of the glue for me when I was looking to go without an agency. And so, talking to all the agencies, I figured out, okay, there's a couple pillars here that are super important. Obviously, legal is the most overwhelming with anything, in my opinion, but the attorney is always there to look ahead and see the landmines and the what ifs. And I found that Ellen gave me such peace of mind in terms of, okay, here's who you go through for life insurance, and this is what you want to make sure you don't forget, and escrow, and all the things that sort of branch out from this complex process. I had such trust in her and her abilities as an attorney, and she knew what the hell she was doing. So I'm eternally grateful to her and to your firm for helping me through the process. And you're a partner, right?
I'm a partner. Ellen's my partner. So Ellen Essig is her last name. Is amazing. She basically wrote the book of surrogacy in Ohio, and I think a lot of what you're talking about is one of the things we as attorneys do, which is we are drafting an agreement, and one of the roles of the agreement is to bring all the pieces of the surrogacy together. So the agreement is addressing these different topics that you're talking about. Insurance, compensation, termination, selective reduction, who the doctors are. And so it's an important piece of the puzzle, and making sure that all of those different aspects of the journey are brought together in one document that is then reviewed with the parents, reviewed with the surrogate, to make sure everybody has an understanding of what's going on. So it is a lot. And it's also something that we as fertility law attorneys, we do all day, every day. So that really enables us to help somebody like you who it was your first time, or maybe it's the second or third time going through that process, but it's brand new for so many of our intended parents. And so as an experienced fertility law attorney, that's something that they can bring to the table.
Yeah. And it is a state by state situation.
Exactly. So surrogacy law varies dramatically state by state. So I'm in Ohio. It's surrogacy friendly here. I also practice in Kentucky and in Illinois. How a state is surrogacy friendly really depends on the specific state. So in Ohio, for example, we have case law that says surrogacy is not prohibited by public policy. In Kentucky, there's no case law, there's no statutory law for gestational surrogacy. In Illinois, there's actually statutory law. So it's not coming from a court, it's coming from the legislature that wrote the law. Ellen's also going to be, or is licensed now in Michigan. There's going to be a new law coming into play where it's no longer legal to do surrogacy in Michigan. That's coming through a statutory means. So how the laws get there, what the laws say, it varies dramatically. And so something that we often do is we often have cross-jurisdictional matters. Intended parents might be in one place, surrogate might be in a different place, and by place I mean state. The fertility clinic might be in a third state. So one of the things that we do as we get started on the agreement is figure out, all right, what is the best law to apply to the contract, to enforce the contract? And then what also is going to be the process for getting the intended parents a birth order? That's the process in most states, so that they're walking into the hospital with a document from a court that says that they're the parents of the child that's going to be delivered to by the surrogate.
Yeah, which by the way, I forgot that at the hospital.
You did. So
Like
what happened?
well, then we went back and we ended up going and getting it like during her, and I was like, "Oh yeah, there's that one piece of information that I need." And
It's
again,
an important piece
that's
of
why
paper.
Ellen was always like, because when it comes to legal I mean, I get overwhelmed with all of that stuff, and I had so
Mhm.
much on my plate, and so she was so incredibly helpful. And so what I want to do today for people, especially for people who are trying to forego an agency, don't have the money to pay 150 to $250,000 to an agency and feel like they could do it themselves, find this perfect surrogate. I just want to make sure that they are teed up and understand all of the different complexities around the legal component. So I've got 10 questions here that I feel like maybe we'll cover it, but if you have anything else that you feel like at the end that you want to make sure that we say, let's do that too. So let's start with this one. So the key legal steps that intended parents need to take before matching with a surrogate.
So here's where I think it's important to understand like what legal does and what a matching program or agency does. And the terms matching program and agency, an agency technically is a licensed entity. And so in many cases, these programs, there's not actually a means through which to get licensed in the state. So it's always a good question to ask, like, are you a matching program or are you an agency? But then also understand, like, a matching program might not be able to be an agency. So I use them interchangeably. Also, when we think about them, like, each one provides different services. So when we're talking about this, it's not necessarily an apples and apples comparison. So as folks are thinking about like, what do I want? What do I need? I think that's important to keep in mind. So legal tends to fall into kind of like the timeline of things that happen much later than when a matching program would. So if an intended parent is looking for a surrogate, either they've been told by their medical provider that they need a surrogate, it's a same-sex couple, whatever the case may be, then they start that process of looking for a surrogate. Once there's a surrogate, then there's certain clearances that need to happen. There's certain checks that need to happen. So like a criminal background check should be done. That's something that's often done by a matching program. A general background check for the surrogate. We want to know her marital status because if she's married or partnered, often if they're living together, we need them both in the agreement. The surrogate's going to need to have medical clearance so she can be a surrogate. That's going to involve getting pregnancy records from before, because surrogates need to have had at least one live birth in order to be a surrogate. Health insurance is something that should be looked into sooner rather than later, because that can take a little bit of time. So once an intended parent knows who the surrogate is, then you can start looking at her health insurance, whether it's through her job or if that's something that needs to be purchased. A lot of times matching programs will do a home visit just to see where the surrogate lives, what it will look like when she's pregnant. There's going to be additional screening and treatment appointments with the clinic. Mental health evaluations are important. There's also often a joint counseling session. A lot of those things all happen before somebody even gets to my door. Right. And so whether it's an independent journey or has a matching program involved, those are the kinds of things that are happening before I even get a call. Because when I get a call, what I want to know is they are ready to move forward with legal. So they've got all that stuff taken care of. They've got embryos ready to go. Really, there's just that last piece of drawing up the contract. Now, the contract has the benefit of making sure we have all those pieces in place because it pulls it all together, everything from the doctor to the compensation to what's our plan for escrow, what are we doing for health insurance, life insurance, what are our beliefs about termination and selective reduction, where's delivery going to happen. Like all of those pieces get pulled together in the agreement, and it's kind of like a check and balance to make sure that everything has been thought of. But that's really the work that I'm doing, and I'm getting that information either from intended parents if it's an independent journey or from the matching program if it's not. And then I'm drafting it into the agreement. I'm explaining it to my client. So that's a lot of what I think you were talking about with Ellen, and really feeling like, okay, this is tying it together and feeling supported. That's always our goal. I love that. Yeah. And then sending the agreement over to the gestational carrier's attorney to start that process of negotiation.
Okay, so and I do explain some of that in the workshop where it's like, pro tip, don't hire your attorney until your surrogate has passed the psychological exam, until you've gotten all those checklists from your OB. It's like, yes, this surrogate is a viable surrogate. So once you have that person you've matched with, then you enlist legal, and then you guys move forward with all of the different negotiations. And the biggest negotiation point, or the most costly, is how much you're going to actually pay the surrogate for her services. And is that what you normally see, is like somebody puts a number out there and then the attorneys kind of go back and forth in that agreement? Or does the person ahead, like, how does that number usually come to fruition?
So it's interesting you ask that, because it is often it's the biggest direct payment to the surrogate. When it's a matching program, that's already determined. Mm-hmm. A matching program will sign an agreement with intended parents and then also with gestational carrier, and they'll have a list of kind of expenses and compensation that they normally use. And the parties are in a way already agreeing to that. But the parties did not have counsel at that point. And so there is some wiggle room for negotiation, but generally we're not seeing a ton of movement when it comes to the base comp. That's the payment for her to be pregnant. When it's independent, what I found is often there's already been discussions between the intended parents and the carrier before they're even coming to my door. Because, if you're talking to a potential surrogate and you guys are like in two totally different worlds, it's probably not the right match. And so maybe there's some negotiation on it, but I really see a lot more negotiation on like what kind of expenses are going to be covered, what are the travel limitations. We always want to make sure that we have termination selective reduction correct. So base comp often mostly is already set up before I get involved, although it's certainly something that I have and can negotiate.
Yeah. So in my situation, that is what happened. And I had looked up market, kind of what surrogates get paid in the market, if you will. And I had asked my intended surrogate, what exactly are you looking for financial compensation? She just basically said, well, what do you think is fair? And you're not always going to get that. There was not a lot of there was no back and forth. It was like, I think it ended up being like 45,000, 45 to 50 or something. What do you see normally in the Midwest in terms of market?
Yeah, and you're so right? Because it's a very regional thing. And
Mhm.
so what a surrogate gets paid in California, it can be different than what they get paid here. And even within the Midwest, there can be differences. Somebody in Chicago versus somebody in rural Ohio. I think that 40 to 50,000 is a pretty common range at this point. When I started, it was more like 25 to 30. We've really seen an increase. And I will say, I see also more than 50. And it's not just the base comp, it truly is a package. So it
Yeah.
also depends on what other things might be covered or might not be covered.
Yeah. So for the most part, you don't have any major league negotiations going on back and forth between, like, for that actual big component, like what
I
they
mean,
get.
there could be. And
Yeah.
if the parties can't get there, there's really no amount of negotiation that's going to, if they're just on complete other sides, there are some gating topics, I would say, for a contract. And this is where also like a matching program is really helpful in figuring out in the match, like, do these parties go together? And so
Mhm.
if somebody's doing this as an independent journey, like, there are certain gating issues that they should start with. I think compensation is one of them. I have seen negotiations fall apart because the parties were just so completely a polar opposites of what they thought or what they could do for compensation that it just wasn't going to move forward. But I think more about like termination selective reduction. Like, the parties have to be on the same page when it comes to that. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's what the surrogate would do if it was her own child, but if she doesn't feel like if she could do what the intended parents wish, then that's not a good match, because it is a very sensitive topic,
Mhm.
and we don't know what the courts would or would not do if somebody breached it in the contract.
Yeah.
Um, Another one is vaccines. Like, I have seen contracts fall apart because one party wants to get the COVID vaccine or a booster at this point, and the other party doesn't. That can be a gating issue. That can be a walkaway issue. So that's a question I would ask up front as well. Um, uh, Compensation, expenses, understanding what that other person's life is like. Do you have young kids? Are you going to need childcare? Do you work? What kind of lost wages do you have? You're going to want to get pay stubs if that's the case. Understanding, do they have short-term disability or paid maternity leave, because that can be used to offset. So those are the kinds of points of negotiation that I think can be managed a little upfront, just to make sure as you're picking somebody to be your surrogate that they're the right fit. But I think fit goes so much beyond just the negotiating points, right? Like, there has to be a feeling of trust, because there's a real lack of control when somebody else is carrying your pregnancy. And so making sure, like, do I feel like this is a person that I can communicate with, that is going to do what they're saying they're going to do? Because yes, we can write it in a contract, but from a like practical standpoint, we also want to know like I feel good about this person. That's why we do these background checks, criminal background checks, home visits. Those are all different boxes that you can check, not just because you're trying to check the boxes and like quote unquote do the right thing, but also to like really dig into that person and understand, especially if it's somebody who maybe an intended parent didn't know before or have a relationship before, really making sure that they understand that person. Because as much work as it is to find somebody and start talking about a match, like better to have something fall apart then than to have issues when there's a pregnancy.
How often are you seeing people finding surrogates independently?
That's a great question. I would say most of my matters are through a matching program or agency, but I definitely have independent matches. I've got a few right now, I even think.
There are so many moving parts and all of the things that you have to juggle when somebody else is carrying your child. It's wild. And I forgot about the selective reduction part and what happens if there's something that is jeopardizing the surrogate's health or the baby. You have to be in line on all of that stuff or it could be a really bad situation. I don't think we had a home visit for mine, but I think it's because maybe she'd been a surrogate before.
I don't know how often um, it happens that matching programs do it, but I would say it's best practice. It's another data point. And really, I mean, we talk about no smoking, healthy environment for the pregnancy, going to somebody's house as a way to really understand what does that look like.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Back to the whole the law varying by state, a lot of people end up finding a surrogate in another state, which I think depending on your emotional state and your situation, some people don't want to necessarily like have the surrogate. They don't really want it to be a local relationship because it's too hard for them maybe. So if you do find someone in another state, that just adds logistic complexity, right?
That's correct. So multi-jurisdictional. When I say jurisdictional, I mean state. Surrogacies is something we deal with all the time. Intended parents are in one state, surrogate is another state. The clinic might be in a third state. And so, from a legal perspective, what we want to do is we want to make sure we're applying the law of the state that has like the best surrogacy law to the enforcement of that contract. So some states have law based on case law. Some states have law based on statutory law. Some states have no law, but they're doing it in practice. So the whatever jurisdictions are involved, that's where intended parents want to start talking to attorneys. And intended parents should talk to several attorneys before picking, because just like the surrogate needs to be a good fit, the attorney needs to be a good fit too. And so, you know, if somebody is in Indiana, let's say, and their surrogate is in Ohio, they should be talking to counsel in both states to understand what do I need in this specific setup in order to do a surrogacy. And the attorneys can also talk to one another. I mean, there's groups of us. There's an organization called the Academy of Adoption and Assistive Reproductive Technology Attorneys. And this is a great place for folks who are looking for attorneys. There's a state-by-state directory. And what's so great about it is that every attorney has to be experienced and vetted by their peers before they're allowed in this organization, because this topic, this area of law is so nuanced that it's and it like we're talking about like all these different things that you have to pull together. You really want somebody who's experienced and who understands the different pieces to draft the agreement, to also be reviewing and negotiating the agreement on behalf of the carrier. So getting that expertise and experience is huge. So when you're looking at the different jurisdictions, you know, you can look at this directory and see, okay, who's licensed in that state. Give them a call. Say to them, hey, like I'm looking at a surrogate. I would wait till you're fairly confident that this person's going to be your surrogate. Like, don't call about 10 different possibilities. But like, this is my situation. How would you handle this? Like, who should draft? Who should review? What should the law be that's going to be the enforcement of the agreement? What does parentage look like? Because it's so state specific, any person who's practicing in that state should be able to answer those questions.
I have that directory in the workshop too. Thank you for that. I put it in there just for people to that was a really good piece of information.
And in terms of like just logistics of being further away or closer away, sometimes the perfect surrogate is across the country. Sometimes the perfect surrogate is in your neighborhood. I really feel like fit is so important. A benefit of having somebody close by is that you don't have to travel. to get to them. You can go to appointments with them. You don't have to travel for delivery. If you have other kids, it's also easier if you're not traveling out of state. That said, like you said, there are reasons to not do it, and maybe your person's not in that jurisdiction. So whatever the case may be, it can be set up in the contract. It can be more expensive if folks are in different states, because then you've got travel, and intended parents are paying either if it's for them or for the carrier to get places.
I agree with you on at least going through the experience the way that I did. Having someone who you trust and really feel comfortable with is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so while you may want them to be local, like if you find your perfect surrogate and you're in Ohio and your perfect surrogate's in Indiana, but she hits on all the other dials and you really feel like she is altruistic as well and caring for the baby, I would say that would be one that maybe you'd have to wrap your brain around, because I'd rather have that than have someone here that I felt like a little dicey about. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a really, really important relationship.
And that, as somebody who's doing an independent journey, is really going to be a call that they're going to need to make, and only they can really make for themselves,
Hmm.
because the
Yeah.
contract can be set up however you want when it
Yeah.
comes to that,
Yep. And then
assuming the states have surrogacy that's legal,
assuming they're not naughty
and
states.
assuming they're not naughty states. That's right. I call them the naughty states.
That's actually great. So let's go back to this whole parental rights process that I sort of like, you know, glazed over and realized how important that was on the day of the delivery. Can you step by step that for someone, because that's just
Yeah,
something you wouldn't even know if you
absolutely.
were going
So
through
so
surgery.
when we think about legal, generally, not always, because the states are different, but generally there's two phases of legal. First phase is drafting and negotiating the agreement. So you've got your carrier, you've got your clearances, you're ready for legal. The attorney puts all the pieces of your agreement into a document, goes through it with intended parents, it sends it over to the carrier's attorney. There's the negotiation back and forward. Once everybody feels good with the agreement, the attorney sends what's called a letter of legal clearance to the fertility clinic, saying you can move forward with embryo transfer. That's phase one. In all states, that happens. Phase two is generally, but not always, going to court to get a court order saying that the intended parents are the legal parents and the surrogate and her spouse or partner are not. Because if you think about it, like if a woman delivers a baby, she's presumed to be the mother and her spouse is presumed to be the other parent. So we need to go to court to rebut that presumption and basically tell the hospital, nope, that's not actually the case. What the case is that the intended parents are the parents. And so in Ohio, we can get what's called a pre-birth order. So you're walking into the hospital with that order so they know you're the parents, intended parents, now parents, make all medical decisions. Their names go directly on the birth certificate. Baby goes on their insurance and baby is discharged to them. Basically, all the parental things. But in many states, you need that court order to essentially put the necessary legal teeth behind the contract. Contract evidence is everybody's intent. You really want to make sure that everybody is represented by legal counsel, because you never want somebody to say, I didn't know what I was getting into. I know, like, for example, in Ohio, my judges, when I go to court and explain that this is a surrogacy, like, they want to know that everybody was represented by legal counsel, because that's a comfort level thing. That's a informed consent thing. And so it's really, really important. It's also best practice.
Let's talk about some other things that branch outside of legal but that all work together, which is the life insurance. That was also an overwhelming topic.
There's a couple organizations that deal with insurances for surrogacy. One is called Art Risk. Another is International Fertility Insurance, and insurance is really important. So one big piece of it, like you said, is it's life insurance or it's surrogate accidental death insurance. God forbid something were to happen to her, it would provide a monetary payment to her family. The other thing we do in our agreements is we say, like, because of that insurance being in place, her family will not sue intended parents for wrongful death. So it also protects intended parents.
Yep.
That can be surrogate accidental death. It can also be term life insurance. It gets a little weedy, and so an attorney or those companies can help explain it. But there's different things that you can do with those vehicles.
Yep.
There's another important insurance, and that's health insurance. So the surrogate needs to have health insurance that can cover a surrogacy pregnancy, and not all insurances cover that. And so if she's employed or if her spouse is employed and they have insurance through work, those organizations can review that insurance to see if it would cover a surrogacy pregnancy. And it's never 100%. Like these companies are never like, yes, for sure, this will cover always and forever, especially because insurance changes so much. And so then there become products like backup products that you can get in case plan A doesn't work. If her insurance has an exclusion for surrogacy, then intended parents need to figure out what they're going to do about health insurance. So, Affordable Care Act has been an option these past many years. There's also surrogacy specific insurance, although that can be very, very expensive. But, you know, medical bills can just be obscenely high. And so we want to have health insurance to make sure that we don't have $500,000, $1 million in bills if something goes wrong. At the end of the day, it's all intended parents' responsibility to pay those medical expenses. And so we want to make sure that there's coverage there. Then once we figure out health insurance, we need to make sure that the doctors that we plan to use, the OB, the delivery hospital, are in network, because that's going to make the whole process much less expensive than if she's delivering out of network.
I can remember when I was going through this, the biggest financial stressors coming at me where I was like, oh, wait, did I think that through? First of all, it's what you're going to pay the surrogate, which is obvious. But then you get into the health insurance where it's like, okay, her husband had the health insurance, so we had to go through Aetna to see if they had an exclusion. The third thing was lost wages. If she has a nursing job and she can't be on her feet, those three things are like very large ticket items. The
And
one
they're
is not,
unknown.
but
You don't,
the other
right.
two are little dicey. So like knowing that up front is obviously very important.
And it's so hard because you don't know what the medical bills are going to be. And you can know some lost wages, right? Like one of the negotiation pieces is what are her recovery lost wages. So after she delivers, how many weeks after delivery are intended parents paying her lost wages? And that's something that we figure out. When we think about lost wages, we've got two pieces of it. We've got her recovery lost wages. So that is how much time are the intended parents going to cover her lost wages after she delivers. And I always ask for pay stubs because I want to see what she's actually getting in order to calculate on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, what that is. So intended parents know, hey, she's asking for 4 weeks if it's a vaginal delivery or 6 weeks if it's a cesarean. This is how much it's going to cost. But there is the unknown of if she's on bed rest or if she can't work for whatever reason. And that's not a number that you have any idea of until you get there. Now, going back to the insurance conversation, there are insurance products that intended parents can purchase to cover things like bed rest. So not recovery, but like if she's put on bed rest. Then it just becomes an analysis that the parents have to make. Like, is it worth it for me to pay the premium of this insurance policy, or would I rather not? And, then the risk is on me.
Looking back, my surrogate's husband switched jobs while we were going through this. And I can remember feeling really nervous because I knew that it was covered through his current. And I was like, oh, wait, am I going to have to pay for these medical bills for labor? Because that's a huge, huge cost. So there are so many what ifs. My recommendation, like, of course, look at the premium and see like how much that is. You have to weigh out the pros and the cons, but anywhere you can get coverage on something that's not going to be astronomical, cover your bets.
Yeah, and really understand what the product is that you're buying. If you think it's covering X, really dig in and make sure it is going to cover X. You don't want to learn that there is an exclusion. So just that's another place where I think intended parents really need to educate themselves. When I think about somebody who wants to go on an independent journey, it's the type of person who can really feel comfortable being the brains of the operation and knitting together all the pieces. They're
Yep.
they're bringing that responsibility onto themselves and then making sure that they have the right professionals in place to fill in all those areas of expertise, but like truly the like intellectual piece of it and the financial piece, like all of it stops with them.
You don't know what you're capable of sometimes when you're faced with, okay, there's $150,000 here to let someone else manage that. And yes, there's pros to that. But also, if you don't have that kind of money and it's going to really put you in a financial situation. I do think the real magic of the agency is them finding your surrogate. That's the biggest thing for everyone, is finding this person who's perfect and it's going to have this great experience and be successful. So I think some people don't realize they're capable of maybe managing a situation like
Yeah,
this.
I mean, they have to get all those pieces in place, like finding the surrogate, screening the surrogate. Um, I think there is more to matching that the programs provide, and that's really like understanding what each program does. So things like setting up travel arrangements, interfacing with the clinic, interfacing with the OB, getting records sent, communicating because they've done it before. Like, what are the protocols? What is the fertility clinic telling her to do? I think they can also be helpful in the event that there's some sort of problem between the intended parents and the carrier. They can help mitigate that, they can help mediate that. So I think for folks who aren't using an agency or matching program, they should think like, it is possible that I'm saving money there, but I might need to spend more on counseling sessions, mental health joint sessions, possibly legal, if there is a problem. And so we want to make sure that that's also built into the contract, because we all walk into these arrangements hoping that everything is going to go perfectly from a medical perspective, from a relationship perspective, but we do have to set up a path of success for the inevitable what ifs.
Yep.
And pregnancy is hard, it's emotional, there's a lot going on. So what if there is a problem with intended parents and gestational carrier as we go down the path? If there's not a matching program involved, who then becomes the mediator between that?
What about escrow? The awkward conversation around finances, and
Mm-hmm.
you set up this financial structure in the legal agreement, and so you have this company that does act as the buffer and the middleman and make sure that the surrogate is getting paid without you having to have those awkward conversations.
Yeah, I think escrow is a great idea. I think it's best practice. In some jurisdictions, it's actually required. Um, Escrow does two things. One, it protects the surrogate because she knows that the money that's guaranteed to her in the contract, if the pregnancy works, is no longer within the control of the intended parents. It's actually within a separate account specifically for the surrogacy. The other thing escrow does is it manages payments. So the escrow company will take the agreement and they will study the agreement, and then they will issue payments according to the agreement. So she has a travel expense, she turns it into escrow pays it out. Now, just like everything else, whether it's an independent journey or not, that does not relieve intended parents of the duty to watch over things, right? Like, again, you always want to be the brains behind the operation and making sure that what is happening is what you expect to happen. But that does remove intended parents from the day-to-day writing of checks, and really does put that task on escrow. All that said, intended parents should keep in mind, again, the buck stops at them. So if escrow is messing up, if escrow is not giving her the money when it's supposed to, if there's some other problem with escrow, which has happened, they are responsible for the money. So it's really important that intended parents pick an escrow company that's reputable, that's experienced, talk to other folks who have they used. There are people who have been in the field for a very long time with a long track of success, and those are the kinds of folks you want to have managing your money, because putting $100,000 in escrow and then having that money not be there and still being responsible for the surrogacy is not a position that anybody wants to be in. That is heartbreaking.
I use Stork. Do you have any other? I think you mentioned C Trust.
C Trust is used a lot. Mm-hmm.
Do you have
Yeah.
any other that you
I, I'd have to look it up, and I'm always careful. Like, I don't tell people like use this person, use that
Yeah.
person. What I do is I make lists and I give referrals. Same
Yep.
with attorneys. Like folks should really talk to multiple professionals in each area to make sure that they have the right fit. And so there are so many Facebook groups out there. There are a lot of resources where people can find that information, but they have to vet it themselves. They have to take it, not rely on what somebody's saying on Facebook, but research it and make sure it works for them.
So in your experience or with your firm, do you have any other landmines, best practices, any sort of wisdom that you would provide, just like if your bestie was listening to this?
What am I telling my bestie? I mean, I really think that getting the right professionals involved is crucial. Not just attorneys, and not just because I'm an attorney, but having the right mental health professional. I think some people kind of don't want to do mental health. They just think it's like yet another thing. I think it's so important. I mean, they should be considering whether the surrogate is an appropriate candidate to be a surrogate. Same for intended parents. I mean, not everybody should be an intended parent. Also having joint counseling sessions. I mean, that's the beginning. If this is a surrogate that intended parents don't know before, like that's the beginning of a relationship that is going to be so fundamental for the next 9 months, 12 months, 15 months, 2 years. So I wouldn't shy away from that. Like to me, that is a bonus. And again, like I'd rather find out early that this is not a match that should be moving forward than when there's a pregnancy, because at that point, the train's out of the station. Like you're
Yeah.
moving forward. Um, Making sure you have the right doctors involved. Um, you know, Carriers often, and in some states, are required to be the person to pick the doctor. But the intended parent should feel comfortable picking up the phone and calling the doctor and saying, hey, have you ever done a surrogacy? What does that look like for you? Can I be in the room when you have a visit? Or if I'm out of town, would you be okay with videoing? Like, can we do that? Also, with delivery, like intended parents should feel very comfortable also going to the hospital tour and asking questions. Have you ever had a surrogacy? What does that look like for you? If there's space, can we stay at the hospital also overnight while our kid is here? So, really advocating on that piece as well. Getting the right people set up for escrow and being able to take that piece off your plate, I think is really, really helpful. Making sure you've got insurance set up. Insurance also, if somebody's like, ooh, I really don't like that piece, they have management services that can deal with the bills as well. So something else to consider for somebody who I know folks do it with matching programs, but also as an independent, that might be something that is worth the expense because you're handling so many of the other things. So those are some things I think I would share with my bestie if she was looking at surrogacy.
You were just spot on with that first part too. And at the beginning of my workshop, the first module in the workshop is there's a couple lessons in there. And the one is the T word, and the one is make sure you're sure. And then we do a visual exercise, like the crystal ball exercise around, picture your child at the age of 14 and them asking you, like, how did I come into the world? And like, are you, so I go through a whole entire module around, are you ready for this? Is this the right thing for you? Because I remember when we were in the throes of infertility, this is like way back in 2006, 7, 8, 9. I mean, it's been a long journey. And I can remember at one point I was so desperate to have a baby that I was like, okay, let's adopt. Like, let's just go get a baby. And we went to this large group and then this small group. And we're in this group with these intended parents. And I remember having this like rush of anxiety. And I was like, what am I what am I doing? This is going
Right.
to be I'm not ready for this. And I love adoption. I think it's amazing. I wasn't ready for that. And so to take a step back and really remember, like, this is about you, but it's really about this human that you're bringing into the world. And so you have to be really comfortable in supporting them. And like, I'm so proud of our journey, and I want Kyle to always know. And like the surrogate just came to our Sky and her husband came to the birthday party, and like we keep in touch. And do I expect everyone to even want that or have that? No. But the first part of thinking about all this shouldn't be the nuts and bolts around the process. The first part should really be like, is your heart 100% in this, and is your partner, if you have one, in lockstep with you,
Right.
and your surrogate and the mental health of everybody involved. So I'm really, really glad that you said that.
And I think that's so important to keep in mind a couple things. One, that there are many pathways to parenthood, including surrogacy, but not limited to surrogacy. And it is really dependent on the people involved.
Yep.
And also putting a priority on the child that's going to result from this. And how do we communicate the story of how they came to being with them? A lot of mental health professionals will say early and often, same when it comes to donor conceived people, telling them the story of how they came into being. It really is a trust thing for intended parents and their future children who will not always be children. So we hear
Right.
early and often on that. And then I think just that appreciation that you have for your surrogate, because even if a surrogate is getting paid, there there is a huge sacrifice that goes into this process. And you talked about altruistic motives. Like, absolutely. Like, there is so much more. Like, the person who is the surrogate that you want to have has a heart
Mm-hmm.
as a reason that she's doing this. And she's sacrificing, her family is sacrificing. No amount of money is a true compensation for that. And
Yeah.
so, really valuing that. I had a family, this was so beautiful. I had a family recently that when their child was born, named their child the middle name of the surrogate. Like, it was just, it was really touched me. And so, is that always the relationship? No. Does everybody want that relationship? Not necessarily, but when that is the organic thing that happens, it's really beautiful too.
It makes me tear up because I have that similar situation. It's like you want that for everybody. It's crazy. It's like, being in the room and experiencing that was like my body like left the floor.
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh my god." And so there's another thing in my workshop. It's like, will I love the baby like I would if I delivered him or her? And that's a big question, right?
Mm.
And it's a feeling. It's a feeling for sure that you need to process. And my answer to that is it's different. So I had the ability to have Dane, with my own body, and then watching Kyle be born in the room, like those are two very different experiences. But man, since I did have the right headspace and mindset and mind frame going into it, I chose to see the Kyle situation as this equally extraordinary, albeit different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a testament too of therapy and are you ready? And is this something that you're doing, for the greater good, not just for your own selfish motives? And yeah, I mean, it can be just a really incredible. Would I ever have asked for the struggles, the pain, the heartache, the loss? No. But then the universe plops this person down, and then next thing you know, you're like this gift of like, and the humanity component of it. So I want everyone, and I know not everyone's going to have a perfect experience, but I would love for people going through this journey. It's hard enough. I would love for them to experience that side of it
Mm-hmm.
because they deserve that,
Right.
But I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you have a lot of a lot of things on your plate. So the fact that you carved out some time for the people that are yet to come and experience this, I truly appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful talking to you. You're asking all the right questions, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. And tell Ellen I said hello, will you?
I will, absolutely.
All right, stay in touch and I will too.